Good morning friends and welcome to NPTEL online certification course on Indian poetry in English. You might remember well that presently we have been doing the lectures especially on Indian English poets who were quite modern in their outlook. And today in that series we are going to have one more very significant and celebrated name, that is of Arun Kolatkar. Kolatkar was not only a modern poet, but as a modern poet he was actually one of the most experimental poets, and today we shall see how Kolatkar, with his professional etiquettes, with his professional expertise, how he made Indian English poetry vibrant with his experimental poetry. But before we go on and examine the works of Kolatkar, let us have a look at Kolatkar's life and the background that Kolatkar got. Friends, modern Indian English poetry, especially in 1970s, because we are dealing with post independence poetry. So, modern Indian English poetry of 70s and 80s, actually they are quite remarkable for the vivid presentation of contemporary time. I mean, all over the world there were several changes, and these changes also had an imprint and effect on Indian English poetry. Cultural identity and Indian sensibility with global touch became the hallmark of Indian English poetry. And in this regard, there are certain names to be taken with utmost respect, and one is that of Sebke Kumar, then Arun Kolatkar, Keki and Darubala. We have already read Keki and Darubala, then G. Patel, Dilip Chitre. All these people actually use the themes of Indian situation, ritual, mythology, superstition, socio-political life of their contemporary times. All of them, even though they were modern, but their outlook on life and their depiction in their poetic world was quite different. Poetry had actually become more colloquial. It was not like a sort of imitation the way we had been reading about how early Indian English poets imitated, but then poetry became very much experimental in nature. And when we talk about poetry becoming experimental in nature, we must also try to understand what exactly we mean by experimental poetry. And in this regard, Arun Kolatkar is a representative voice of this kind of poetry. Now, experimental poetry, my dear friends, experimental poetry, when we talk about, we also ought to understand the nature of experimental poetry. Experimental poetry, if we take the words of Bruce King, who in his book Modern Indian English Poetry says that experimental poetry not only foregrounds techniques, it actually applies a different sort of technique, but it also explores uncommon experiences. Now, poetry would not be the same as it had been when we were talking about the early modern poets and all. So, here you can find a sort of uncommon experience, and there is also a rejection of the common world or environment. The poets actually wanted to experiment not only with the form, but also their vision, and everything was treated quite unconventionally. It is always better to say that experimental poetry, if experimental poetry can also be considered to be surrealism and surrealistic in nature. Now, you also might be interested to know what is actually surrealism. Surrealism was actually a movement in the world of art, and after the First World War, this movement became very popular, and one of the main exponents of this art, Andre Breton, he has defined surrealism as pure psychic automatism, by which he means that it was the focus was on unconscious, and it was through the unconscious that the wisdom of the heart or the imagination was explored. So, what Brayton defines surrealism is quite significant, and Brayton says it was a sort of pure psychic automation in which it is intended to express either verbally or in writing the true function of thought. It is actually, since it is related to the movement which is from the world of arts. So, thought was actually dictated in the absence of all control exerted by reason and outside all aesthetic or moral control. So, that is how experimental poetry is different, and those people who practice this experimental poetry, they are in some way or the other related to the world of art, related to the world of visual, and Arun Kolatkar was also one such. Now, let us have a look at Arun Kolatkar's life. He was actually born in Kolhapur of Maharashtra in 1932 in a Hindu patriarchal family. With Kolatkar, we have one advantage, that even though he is experimental, he is a bilingual. He writes both in Marathi as well as in English, and not only was he a poet, but he was a translator, a graphic designer that he was, because he was not a professor like many other poets of Indian English poetry, but he was actually a graphic designer. But then with the help of his art, because he brought his art in the world of poetry, and then in 1977 he won the Commonwealth Prize. He also won Sahitya Akademi Award in 2005 for one of his Marathi poems named Bhijki Bahi, which was later translated into English as Sarpasatra. And he came to the limelight when he translated the Marathi Sant Tukaram into English. It was very sad of Arun Kolatkar, who actually left us in 2004. He also had he did not have a very comfortable and cherishing married life, because he had to leave his first wife and then he married the second one as well. So, now let us try to see what were the works of Kolatkar for which he is very famous. As I told you earlier, that Kolatkar had also been writing in Marathi, and his Marathi poems mostly are about everyday life, day to day life. One of them are named Chirimiri, which came out in 2003, and then Vijki Bahi, which got awarded the Sahitya Akademi Award in 2005. The book got published in 2003 and it was awarded in 2005 by Sahitya Akademi, and then came Drone in 2004. It is often said that though majority of these poets, they are actually influenced by many modern poets, namely T.S. Eliot, then Ezra Pound, then some French poets as well. So, Eliot's influence is also found, and many critics have gone to the extent of saying that Kolatkar's very famous poem named Jejuri actually resembles the wasteland. So, Eliot's influence is reflected through these poems. Like Eliot's The Wasteland, in Jejuri you will find there is a sort of mourning or the poet actually rieves the loss of culture, loss of values and loss of tradition. That is why one may find that Kolatkar's metrical compositions are not metrical, because it does not follow a proper rhyme. You can find that there is a free flow, as the artist would like it, a sort of automatic, because Kolatkar and other poets who were actually the followers of the experimental poetry, they believed that freedom was more important than anything else. So, Kolatkar's English poetry collections comprise Jejuri, which came out in 1976, and if Kolatkar can be remembered only for one major work, I think Jejuri alone fills the gap, and it was because of Jejuri that Kolatkar came into being. Not only in India he became popular, rather he became an international figure. This book Jejuri was published in 1967 for the first time. It is often said that the initial manuscript got lost and Kolatkar had to write it once again, and then came in 2004 Kala Ghoda and Kala Ghoda poems, this Kalagora is a square, I mean in Mumbai, where Kolatkar always used to visit, and it also talks about the everyday life, the mannerisms, the social behaviors of people. Then came the Sarpasatra, which Vizki Bahi we have already talked about, which was in Marathi literature, and then the boat ride and other poems, which came in 2009, but it did not come during his own lifetime, and it is said that A.K. Mehrotra, Arvind K. Mehrotra edited it and published it, because Arun Kolatkar and Mehrotra were very good friends, my dear friend. So, let us see why is Jejuri so famous and what is actually the significance of Jejuri. Now, as I have been saying that these modern poets, who were not only modern, rather they were more experimental. So, what they did, they were actually trying to make a sort of imitation of what the western world was thinking, and that is why the influence is found in their works. So, now what is Jejuri, where it is? Jejuri is actually a very small place, it is a very small place, it is a place of pilgrimage, and it is a place where the temple of Khandoba, which is considered to be an incarnate or form of Shiva and other gods. Now, when the poet actually deliberates upon this, the poet actually talks about how in Jejuri everything has come to a stop, even though there are remains only, fine, but then he actually discusses how people still throng to it and how everything all around Jejuri has got a sort of divinity. So, the collection comprises 31 sections. It is often said that in Jejuri, whatever stones were there, all these stones had a sort of divinity, and the poet actually at times exaggerate also. Since he is a modern poet, naturally he will not believe in a sort of logical thing, rather illogical, psychological things would also be there. But then since he was a graphic artist, one can also find an imprint or a sort of relationship between life and art in Jejuri. So, the Jejuri has got 31 sections. Most of the poems it is actually about how people go to Jejuri to worship, and how in and between the poet, because he makes his own observation. So, it is his own observation, and then he also tries to find out how this place of this pilgrim place has been actually commercialized. So, everything has been commercialized, as in the modern world we would say that the way of the world has completely changed, and there is a sort of commercialization of religion and religious places. For example, we can take a line from one of the poems of Jejuri named Scratch, where it is said, "There is no crop other than God, and God is harvested here around the year." Now, you see, the poet is actually talking about the superstitious attitude of the people in a modern world, but at the same time what the poet says is, because poet at times becomes a bit satiric as well, and he says there is no crop other than God, and God is harvested here around the year. My dear friend, there could have been complete 2 or 3 lectures itself on Jejuri, but my intention here is to make you familiar with most of the major works of Kolatkar and many other Indian poets. So, I will rather be skipping the major details, but I will be familiarizing you with the major works of this poet. One critic in one of his articles has gone to the extent of saying about Jejuri, it is actually a conflict between the rational Western educated narrator and irrational uneducated superstitious pilgrims. The volume is The Poet's Quest for a Spiritual Truth, an examination and investigation of the past legends and myths. So, when the poet goes there to Jejuri, and then the poet goes there with one of his friends or one of his brothers, and then the characters, all these characters which have been mentioned there, some way or the other are related to him. See, so a sort of dialogue goes on between the two, while the one says one must take off the shirt and go to the temple, but at the same time there is a rational voice which says, oh no, what he says, give me a matchbox before you go so that I can smoke. Now, the question is, how religion for one person is something, whereas religion for the modern man is somehow different. So, these two these two poles of thoughts are actually delineated very beautifully by the poet Kolatkar in Jejuri. Now, what are the characteristics, other characteristics of Jejuri, other characteristics of Kolatkar's world? Kolatkar actually tries to bring a sort of defamiliarization. At Jejuri you will find the remnants are there, the stones are there, but then what actually he does is he defamiliarizes it. It appears as if even though it is a place of worship, but then in what state this place of worship is, and with his own professional expertise of being a graphic design, he actually makes it surrealistic. And this surrealistic, when he makes it surrealistic, he is actually quite confident of the workings of the unconscious mind to synthesize these workings with the conscious mind. So, synergy of the unconscious with the conscious mind. One can also find a sort of cosmic vision of life in the world of Kolatkar. Kolatkar's poetic world is full of imagism and symbolism, and as a graphic artist, what he tries to lend to his literary world also the visual effects full of opaqueness. Of course, one cannot say that Kolatkar's world loses this modern sensibility. We can take here one poem which is actually quite reminiscent of what a sort of place this Jejuri is, and in today's world how. So, when there are three Chaitanyas being mentioned, and it is said that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, one ancient Indian saint, had also visited Jejuri. So, Jejuri has got a rich history, but then the poet actually tries to show it the way it is today in the modern world, and he says what Chaitanya, there is another poem named Chaitanya where it is said, "Sweet as grapes are the stones of Jejuri," said Chaitanya. He popped a stone in his mouth and spat out gods. So, every god, every piece of a stone in Jejuri is actually a representation of God. So, this is how Arun Balkrishna Kolatkar actually converts this common experience into an uncommon one, as is reminiscent of, as is actually identical of the modern poetry. Now, the very first poem of this collection Jejuri starts with the Bash, and in this Bash you will find the poet actually mentions, poet is an observer. So, he mentions and he actually transcribes in the same way that how this bus ride, because in this bus he goes to Jejuri and other people also go. So, now see the description, and the description will actually display the graphic and the images of a visual artist. Let us have a look at some of the lines. The tarpaulin flaps are buttoned down on the windows of the state transport bus all the way up to Jejuri. A cold wind keeps whipping and slapping a corner of tarpaulin at your elbow. You look down to the roaring raid. You search for the signs of daybreak in what little light spills out of bus. So, now the image that the poet actually creates is not only visual, but rather it also actually takes us back to our old ancient beliefs, how a man when goes on pilgrimage, your own divided face in the pair of glasses. So, this place has actually got such a sort of magnetic effect that you are yourself divided and you are not at rest to find what you are. On an old man's nose is all the countryside you get to see. You seem to move continually forward towards a destination just beyond the caste mark beyond his eyebrows. Outside the sun has risen quietly. It aims through an eyelet in the tarpaulin and shoots at the old man's glasses. A sound of sunbeam comes to rest gently against the driver's right temple, and the bus seems to change direction. At the end of a bumpy ride with your own face on the either side, when you get off the bus, you don't step inside the old man's head. So, by the time you reach there, your mind, your psyche, your belief is thoroughly changed, is completely changed. My dear friends, the question is that when you are going to a religious place like this Jejuri, where there is no count of time, even the station that the poet actually mentions, the station master is simply worried about the morning and the evening, and the signals at the station appears to be very wooden. So, the time has come to a halt, and then the poet, when and you see the poet interrogates also. This is, if this is a religious place, the gods must have the power. But then in the second poem, The Heart of the Ruin, where the poet himself interrogates that in this age of religion where we are talking of blind superstitious beliefs and all. So, let us see some of the lines of The Heart of Ruin, where the poet says, the roof comes down on Maruti's head. Maruti is Hanumana, and then here the poet actually in a very indirect manner says, if gods are so powerful, why can't the gods actually stop the roof coming down on its own head? Least of all, Maruti himself, maybe he likes the temple better this way. A mongrel bitch has found a place for herself and her puppies. So, you see how this religious place, how this representative religious place has become actually a shelter for the bitch and for the mice and for other things as well. So, in an age of reasoning, the poet actually questions, and the poet says, the pariah puppies tumble over her, maybe they like a temple better this way. Perhaps they want this temple to be this way because they do not want that there should be a sort of renovation of this temple, and even gods do not perhaps want. And then as the lines follow, I have already provided the poem here, you can have a look at it and you can read. I'll read simply some of the lines that actually are very effective. That never did get a chance to get out from under the crushing weight of the roof beam. So, the beam is also hanging and the gods are there. No more a place of worship this place. Now, towards the end the poet actually says, is it now, can it be a place of worship? And then the poet says, no more a place of worship this place is nothing less than the house of God. So, when the house of God, now the poet actually here takes a dig at, the poem can be interpreted at several levels, but the poet actually takes a dig at the superstitious belief of the modern day mankind, and then questions that can this be a place of worship? No more a place of worship, this place is nothing less than the house of God. So, my dear friends, with Jejuri, the poet Kolatkar, Arun Krishna Kolatkar, he actually puts a question mark to everyone and warns us and provides us with the foods of thought that in an age of reasoning, what sort of. So, it is an age of fragmentation, everything has been fragmented here, there are allusions, and then the poet also talks about how Maruti or the Hanuman even cannot save himself, and then it has become only a place, even though Chaitanya himself had said that every stone here has got a sort of divine touch. You can read at leisure Jejuri and you can enjoy a lot. I come to the next one, that is Sarpasatra or Vijki Bahi, which actually got awarded and got translated into English. Here also we can find that the story is related to the Mahabharata, it is based on the Mahabharata, and this is a narrative poem which has got 3 sections. Janmejaya, Jaratkaru speaks to her son Astik and the ritual bath. Now, the story behind this is that Janmejaya, who is Parikshit's son, actually what happens is the episode of King Parikshit's death. Parikshit was actually dead because of the snake bite, and Janmejaya had taken an oath. Janmejaya had sworn that he will actually destroy all the snakes, and that is actually the background of the poem. Now, here also the poet actually has an aim and objective as a visual artist. He says that this should actually reawaken people, and from the ecological points of view also, because Janmejaya wanted to burn the entire forest so that the snake world is actually distracted. So, there is also a hint about the ecological imbalance, fine, and you know the lines of the poem can always testify and justify, but at the same time the poet as a graphic painter was so conscious of, so conscious of the beauty, so conscious of the flora and fauna, that he actually wanted to put his own subtle mission through this, and that is why he took recourse to Sarpasatra. Now let us take some lines from that. My vengeance will be swift and terrible. These are actually the lines of Janmejaya. My vengeance will be swift and terrible. I will not rest until I have exterminated them all. They will discover that no hole is deep enough to hide from Janmejaya. It is said that Janmejaya and Astik, Jarat Karu's son, they were friends, and Astik was actually requested to persuade Janmejaya, but Janmejaya, because he was quite angry with the king Parikshit's death because of snake bite, that is why he wanted to destroy the kingdom, the entire kingdom. And if you might have watched Mahabharata, you might have also watched there, this episode is very much there. So in this Sarpasatra, we find that female protagonist Jaratkaru, who tells her son Astik to convince Janmejaya, as I told you, and the poetry, the book Sarpasatra ends without any hope. Now this is here also reminiscent of the modern man's helplessness in this world, where there is no hope. Kolatkar, through this poetry, presents the contemporary theme of corruption, terrorism and violence. And then there are some lines that can also are quite reminiscent. It only shows what cowards all terrorists are behind their snarling ferocious masks. The last one, which I think is very important from the point of view of Kolatkar's being a visual artist, is Kala Ghoda and other poems. It came out in 2004. It also has got a sequence of 28 poems, and as I told you in the beginning, it is a reflection of Mumbai's lifestyle. It is a Mumbai's everyday lifestyle, where people from all walks of life gathered there, and they had different talks and as well, and he was also a frequent visitor. Now in this poem, which is actually, now in some way or the other, the poet also talks about the modern man's despair, the modern man's instability, and in one of the poem entitled Man of the Year, what the poet says may not be poet's own personal feeling, but maybe he is actually trying to point out to the modern man's restlessness when he says, but nobody knows better than I that time is one thing I am running out of fast, and my one regret is going to be this, to leave this world so full of girls I never kissed. This is, here is a despair. People may get it confused with the poet's own despair, but then the poet actually tries to hint at the instability of a modern man when he says, Malati, Nilofer, Anjali, Santa, Alpana, Kalpana, Sirin, Jareen, Sylvia, Maria, Harlin, Yasmin, Nina, Kamala, Mona, Lopa, I love you all, and I wish I could kiss long goodbye to each of you individually. So there is actually, once again, there is a sort of despair, a sort of a loss, my dear friend. And then the last one, which I said, is Boat Ride and Other Poems, which was actually compiled and edited by none other than Arun Kolatkar's friend Arvind Krishna Mehrotra. So here there are scattered poems which have been brought together, and there also it actually talks about the absurdities of social behavior to surrealistic fantasies. There is a sort of radicalism as well, and commonplace things have been converted into aesthetic. And then you find that there are certain lines, the poet actually also tries to experiment with the lines. You can find how they are so, now structurally also, because a sailor waved back to a boy, another boy waves to another sailor in the clarity of air. The gestures withers for want of correspondence, and that hand that returns to him, the hand his knee accepts as his own, is the hand of an aged person, a hand that must remain patient and give the boy, it is part of time to catch up. So once again he actually talks about the modern man's restlessness, fragmentation and all, my dear friend, in a way, if we talk about the general themes and characteristics of Kolatkar's poetic world, we can find that Mumbai has been a background, because all these poets, Arun Kolatkar, then Dilip Chitre, then Arvind Krishna Mahendra, they had actually formed a Mumbai circle of poets, and the tone in most of the poems are colloquial. It is not as metrical as we have found. So, and you know, even the common incidents, they are actually converted into an uncommon ones. For the one which the lines are mentioned, tell me why the black dog died intriguing between God and our heads. The conflict, the modern man's conflict is also mentioned. Now, before we come to wind up this lecture, let us also see what other people say about Kolatkar, because Kolatkar was one such poet who actually generated a lot of heat and dust. So, Bruce King has rightly said that Kolatkar is aware as a visual artist that a slight manipulation of sight lines of angle of vision can defamiliarize and turn into art what is normally regarded as dull and commonplace reality. It is quite important that we must assess Arun Balkrishna Kolatkar as a modern poet. And what are the elements that we find in his poetry is that ordinary Indian reality has been made quite extraordinary. Ordinary reality has the possibilities for the artist's mind, because the artist looks at an object in a different way. The poem for him is in an object, and then he will transport his own ideas. Kolatkar was very non-committal in his attitude. It is also said that majority of his poems actually record a sort of failure to perceive, and then he is a follower of styleless poetry. But then Kolatkar as an Indian English poet is quite remarkable for his experimentation, and then the more you delve into the world of Kolatkar, you can find the hidden gems that are there. Before I conclude, let me take some lines from the scratch, which actually are quite representative of Kolatkar's poetic art. What he says is, what is God and what is stone? The dividing line, if it exists, is very thin at Jejuri, and every other stone is God or his cousin. So, in a way, no, even though he is satirical, but then at times he becomes so ironic that the details that he provides are really very mesmerizing, and they are very eye opening. So, every stone at Jejuri is God or his cousin. We Indians are capable of creating, establishing relationships not only of human beings but also of gods, and to the gods we often must interrogate in a modern world which is actually dominated by reason, by logic. But then, does life go simply on reasoning? That is a question we shall discuss in the next lecture. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.